No middle, water is wet, not crunchy.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today.
Oh man, you just had to throw that zinger in there at the end. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, fair enough. To that, on that note, cheers.
And
Oh God, is it already starting?
yep. OBS decided to screw with me once again, so welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Record of Sword Forged Worlds, an unofficial Sword World podcast. I am your one and only gaming monk. With me are my three good brothers, Balanced Hydra, Thig, and Doku. It ends up doing this every now and again where it goes to default, but there isn't a default mic. And
yeah, I have that happen with me on Streamlabs sometimes.
Yeah, and it doesn't tell me. So sometimes I end up going live assuming that everything is where it should be, and it isn't. So...
Oh, I love it when that happens.
Oh, yes.
The joys of technology.
Mm-mm. So while I'm at it, let me try and figure out, okay, I was worried that the background music wasn't picking up, but it is. Sorry about that, folks. Technology, it loves to give us the middle finger. But the last couple times that we've done this, we've mostly focused on exploring the world of Accursed. And starting with the larger nations to the east, and then going to the west, then going to the smaller western city-states known as the Ten Children, which aren't really a nation so much as they are a combination of city-states that banded together to keep the western nations, or the eastern nations, I should say, from trying anything funny. Now, I did promise that we would eventually cover Lodos, and while it may have seemed a little bit arrogant for me to say it's more than you know when I did my announcement over for the schedule this week, the main reason I did that was a lot of people, when they talk about their love for Lodos, I feel they're mostly talking about either the original OVA, which at one point I had on Laserdisc. Yes, I had Laserdisc at one point. It was barely over a year. Or the anime series Chronicles of the Heroic Knight. Now, don't get me wrong, both of those are classics. However, they're only the tip of the iceberg. I can't even say the tip. It's the top of the bits of snow on top of the iceberg. That's how little it scratches the surface of what Lodos is. And a lot of it will be covered in this. There will be some crunch material that I'm going to be holding off for later on, because we've been mostly focused on the lore of the setting up to this point. And there is quite a lot of fascinating lore as we've seen over the last few weeks. However, if you guys don't mind, I'd like to do a little bit of house cleaning.
Sure.
So, I need to call somebody out. I need to call somebody out that has been making some takes that have been a source of frustration for myself and several others for weeks now, if not months. Now, one of them is William SRD, who I'm sure is a decent guy, but in his quest to be an entertainer, he ends up getting a lot of shit wrong. He is part of the reason why I've considered doing a similar podcast treatment to Anima, because he drew comparisons between it and Warhammer 40k, and I'm like, Rollmaster was right there. What the fuck are you on? But the bigger one is Mugen Gaming. Now, Mugen Gaming is the team that's going to be handling the official translation of the DX 2.5 core book, which is supposed to be crowdfunding sometime next May. The sort of irony that next May will mark the 5-year anniversary since I started the Legend Edition project. So, there's that. But both William SRD and Mugen Gaming have been perpetuating one particular lie. That being this idea that Lodos laid the groundwork for Sword World. Anyone who tells you this is full of shit. And if you guys will allow me to delve us into the forest of all knowledge, I will explain why I say that anyone who makes that claim is full of shit.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Now, there is only one way the claim has some truth to it, and that is if you are solely using the original replays as they were published in Dragon Magazine. However, I think when a lot of people are thinking of Lodos, those replays are the furthest from their mind. It would be like somebody discussing Warhammer 40,000 and then trying to invoke the original Rogue Trader. It's part of the history, but when people are talking about it in a modern context, that's not what they're talking about. Now, obviously, Lodos started as a series of D&D replays, with Ryo Mizuno handling a lot of the GM work because he was the only one who knew how to run a D&D, I believe it was, because that wasn't translated. His campaigns were in AD&D, but they bumped it down to basic because AD&D wasn't translated yet in English. It wouldn't be for a few years. Now, by the time that it was too late. And in fact, I've covered that story in the past, how the translation of AD&D was a long and expensive process, and by the time it hit Japanese store shelves, other games had come along and kind of stolen its thunder. So, that being said, as the original replays got very popular, and it got popular enough that Group SNE approached TSR with the idea of turning Lodos into an official campaign setting. But some say TSR just wasn't answering their calls. Others have said there was a language barrier issue. Regardless of how it happened, at the end result, the powers that be were not willing to play ball. I suspect, since this was the late 80s, this was right around the time that Lorraine Williams was running things, and no former TSR employee I've ever spoken to has anything nice to say about her.
When in doubt, blame Carla.
But because of that, now Sword World was already I believe was already in development, but don't quote me on that. I might be getting things crosswired. And a large amount of Sword World's development was not fully due to them getting rejected by TSR, but had more to do with the fact that Katakawa wanted their own game to promote within their gaming magazine, which isn't too unsurprising. That's one of the factors that led to the creation of Dragon Quest. And yes, Katakawa had a hand in that as well, but Katakawa has a hand in a lot of things. They're a very big conglomerate. But
I gotta say, if Katakawa doesn't have a hand in it, I'm gonna be surprised.
But when when TSR rejected them, they're like, all right, we'll make Lodos books anyways. Then all of a sudden, TSR was interested and starts getting the lawyers out. Like, again, those of you who know the story of Lorraine Williams and why she's the most hated woman to come out of TSR, this will sound very familiar. But eventually, Lodos Companion is made as a Lodos RPG with all of the D&D stuff filed off. And in fact, from what I've been able to dig up of the game, it used a D6 approach, but I'd say its design ethos has more in common. It only used D6s in very specific circumstances, and the rest was a D100 approach, I believe, which makes it have more in common with basic role-playing than D&D. Also, it used an MP system instead of using the Vancian model, because fuck the Vancian model. But Lodos wouldn't be... But that was in the early 90s. Lodos wouldn't be integrated into Sword World until 1998. And a large reason for that was Lodos Companion and its successors weren't doing as hot compared to Sword World. One could say it's because they were serving different audiences. Lodos Companion was leaning more towards people who had a video game background. Sword World was obviously leaning towards people who had a TTRPG background. And the two of them did not have much in the way of intersection. They were separate lines, done by separate development teams. They were under the Group S&E umbrella, but that's it. And keep in mind, as we've done this history series, there were a lot of people who came in and out of Group S&E over the years. So, yes, Ryo Mizuno had his hand in both, but he had his hand in a lot of things. Both before, during, and after this. And the big reason why that folding happened was in the mid to late 90s, TCGs started cropping up and were very, very profitable and were eating everybody's lunch. This would continue until around 2002 to 2004-ish. I can't remember the exact year, where the TCG scene just suddenly died. I do remember covering that in a previous episode and making a parallel between it and the MMA scene that just appeared and then disappeared in Japan. Although that one died a death largely due to a massive scandal involving the Yakuza.
Oh, wow.
If you look up the story of Pride FC, you'll see how that not only caused a very public and violent death, but also more or less killed the momentum of MMA in Japan. Especially when UFC's parent company Zuffa purchased the contracts of pretty much all of the old Pride guys. And Pride would have a reincarnation years later, but it wouldn't be the same. But that's a story for another day. So, when we get to 1998, that's when we have the Lodos Island World Guide, which will be the crux of what we're going into, especially since that is covering the three major eras of Lodos. The Demon War, which was in the books The Legend of Lodos, a kind of prequel to Record of Lodos War. That was the dawn of the reputation of the people who would become known as the Six Heroes. The six people who had challenged the Demon King and ended that particular war. Then there was the War of Heroes. The War of Heroes is the centerpiece of the Record of Lodoss War books, and as well as the machinations of Carla, because as Doku said earlier, if something goes wrong, blame Carla. What is somewhat amusing when it comes to the War of Heroes is the character of Piratus wasn't in the first few books originally. She was a anime only inclusion at first. But
she's basically the Daryl Dixon of Lodos.
Yeah, but Mizuno liked the character and integrated her into later books. And then of course there is the War of the Destroyer's Resurrection, which took place with the New Generation books. And in the process, there was the many stories of Louis the Rune Soldier, who did make a few adventures in Lodoss a few times. And while it'd be tempting to bring up Legend of Crystania, that's a whole other kettle of fish that I do not want to go into yet. Though a lot of the material for that has been fan translated, and I do want to give a sincere thanks to the Lodoss translation team for helping collect a lot of this. But those main three eras are the ones that we're going to be dealing with in this, because that was how far the books were at the time. And I suppose but even with that, there are still going to be some recurring things. We are still dealing with a post-apocalypse with the destruction of the ancient kingdom. We are still dealing with the fact that a lot of the knowledge of that ancient kingdom was lost. And the fact that magic is still based on runes, the fact that spirit magic is still based on the spirits, that kind of stuff is still present here. And I suppose one of the obvious questions is why Lodoss is referred to as the Accursed Isle. I could say part of the reason is due to the constant upheaval that it goes through, but so does the rest of Accursed. We saw that very clearly. I think it's because of how distant it is from Accursed. If you look on a map of Accursed and the surrounding areas, Lodoss is quite a while south. And sailing technology on ships within Accursed is still a relatively new thing. So imagine, or at least the bigger sailing ships that we see in like the Age of Sail. So imagine making a journey that far south with the equivalent ship technology of, say, a Viking longship. I think you can see why the journey would be considered perilous, even if you're just going straight south.
The intro to Vinland Saga just popped in my head.
Of course it did. But... and let me see if I can... And I did share the full map in a previous episode, so I'm not going to put it up on screen, but let me share with you guys the particular map in question if I can get it. Okay, there we go. So let me...
Actually, if I remember correctly, I do think somewhere it is mentioned that the reason Lodos is called the Accursed Isle is because it is a pain to get there, and you're more likely to die before you're more likely to see land.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Doku, in the side chat, I put up a map of Accursed. And obviously the Island of Damned is Lodos.
Got it.
And that's quite the swim.
Yeah, man, it's been a long time since I've seen that map.
It is definitely quite a swim, and especially if you're not using more traditional sails. But this is a good time as any to go into some of the kingdoms and city-states that are in the place. The first of those is Alanya, which is the most northeastern of the nations. The one that's also called the Millennium Kingdom. It is sandwiched to the north of the Forest of No Return and to the west of the Desert of Storm and Fire. It has a high agricultural yield. Some believe that the reason for its rich agriculture is because the Earth Goddess had fell on that land in its early founding. It also has the only Sages Academy, and because of that, a lot of magical study. And its military has a Mage Knight unit called the Silver Hoof Knights. And while it has all of those things, it also has a reputation for being corrupt and decadent at times. To the point where even civil servants were used to bribing. And of course, that escalated, and by the time we get to the War of Heroes, the kingdom had gone into decline. But in addition to that, you have cities like Alen and Norvis, along with a few others. Obviously, the White Dragon Mountains are the biggest mountain range in that area, and the Forest of No Return.
You know, is it me or is there a lot of Force of No Returns across all of fiction?
Yeah, it is a pretty common trope. It's funny you mentioned that, because I just realized something as a brief aside. With the intro talking about, Lodos was the precursor to Sword World. Correction. Lodos is the precursor to every single isekai slop that you could possibly throw a dart at a dartboard and pick.
That I do not agree with that. Because the true precursor to that is John Carter.
Oh, you have a point. Damn it. You're not wrong.
I rarely am, and yet people are still surprised by it.
In regards to the Forest of No Return, well, where would you suggest they put a suit of mystical armor of invincibility?
Alright, Chuckles, from now on, I choose the adventures.
Phooey!
But obviously one of the more remote areas that still has some claim to fame is the village of Zaxxon. Mainly because that was where Parn grew up, as well as Slain.
Good old Parn.
Mm-hmm.
The most oblivious main character of all time.
And probably one of the Godfather who created the oblivious trope.
No, that was around long before him.
Yeah, he just perfected it. I mean, let's be honest, when you're dotting over a king while an elf is right in front of you, I mean, come on, man. What are you doing?
Yep. But within that reach, there's quite a bit of diversity just within Alanya itself. Obviously, you have the capital, you have its second largest city, Norvis. You have Tarba, which is a bit remote, but that's where the Great Temple of Marfa is. I already mentioned Zaxxon, and the port town of Biruni is also in that area. And its main claim to fame is trading with towns like Raiden and Blade. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up that at one point Zaxxon developed a independence movement. This was something that happened after the end of the War of Heroes, when Slain had developed the title the Sage of the North. Of course, within that area is also the Iron Kingdom, which is the home to the Kingdom of Dwarves. And it is somewhat amusing. It is somewhat amusing that dwarves are considered Earth Fae within this universe.
Is that de facto theory?
No, it's outright name dropped in the first book that dwarves are Earth Fae.
You know, that actually makes a lot of sense. If you think about it.
Yeah, though it was one of the Iron Kingdom was one of the casualties of the Demon War, and one of the things that forced the dwarves to actually start trading with humans, because a lot of their kingdom was lost when the demons started messing with everything. But then a bit to the west, but still up in the north, is the Kingdom of Flame. The Kingdom of Flame is most certainly a feudal state. One of its major cities is Blade, as well as also where the hunting ground of the Fire Dragon is, as well as places like the Desert of Sorma's Fire, the Road of Thirst, and Lake Leonoa. But a lot of the cities within Flame are much more fortified. It is much more of a martial city, especially since it only has two major cities, Blade and Hilt. But even with its small size, it is one of the stronger nations within Lodoss, primarily due to the work of its founding king, Kashu the First. Who happens to be the current king of the place. But
Good old King Cashew.
Blade is, of course, the royal capital, but is far more fortified and has more of a fortress town look compared to its neighbors to the east. Not helped by the fact that they're surrounded by areas that aren't exactly the most hospitable. But within things like the Desert of Storm and Fire, the reason why it has that name is because of the spirits that inhabit it. Namely the fact that the Storm Tribe and Fire Tribe in that area are constantly fighting each other. Those being two nomadic tribes that have their own affiliation with these spirits. And as far as the Fire Dragon's hunting grounds, it is a steppe that's on the western end. But despite the resource richness of the area, nobody settles there because they don't want to piss off Shooting Star. Anytime somebody tried to settle in that area, Shooting Star would end up razing it. That was until Kashu killed Shooting Star. Which made that grassland territory of his kingdom, and there are attempts to settle it. In fact, that was the thing that really got King Kashu his legendary status among other nobility in Lodoss. It's kind of hard to argue with the guy who killed a fucking dragon.
Especially one that makes Smaug look nice.
Yeah. I mean, Shooting Star had the title of the Demon Dragon of Fire Dragon Mountain, and had the only two-part story arc in the original books. I think that should tell you how much not fucking around he is.
Yeah, you're not going to have any conversations with Shooting Star. He's constantly pissed off for no reason. Because dragon.
Yeah. And keep in mind, he was one of the 5 chromatics.
Oh yeah, if you thought there was only one, welcome to fantasy.
There's never just one.
There's always one more.
Yeah, but we're not talking about the mutants in Wolfenstein.
Not today, anyway.
But the main way to cross the Desert of Storm and Fire is through what's known as the Road of Thirst. Or rather, let me clarify that. It is the safest way to cross the desert. You can't see it, but I'm doing massive air quotes when I say that.
I was gonna say, you gotta love it when the safest route through a desert is called the Road of Thirst. Like,
Well, it's either that or you're pretty much just going to wind up getting barbecued or electrocuted, or both if you tried any other path.
Yeah. Though,
Yeah.
it's because you try and go across the place at night. It's freezing. During the day, it's boiling. Oh yeah, and I forgot.
Mother Nature. She's
I forgot
Mother
to mention
Nature.
the monsters.
She's on the drugs.
Mother Nature's always on the drugs. But I forgot to mention the monsters. Sand runners, 2-headed snakes, rock lizards. So you've got that to worry about. And with the 2 spirit kings on that desert, the problem hasn't gotten any better. Or rather, it has got... Let me correct myself. It has lessened a bit. But still, to quote one of my favorite movies... Of course, once you're out, you're still in the middle of the fucking desert.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
I still think it's hilarious that Lodos is called the Accursed Isle just because of the distance it is from the mainland. But then also once you get there, you realize it sucks.
yeah, although
But does it suck more than in the mainland of Elcrest?
no.
Nah, it's about par for the course.
But further westward is the free city of Ryden. So get your rules of nature jokes out of your system. I know you got them. Okay.
No,
good.
I'm not going to say it. It's too easy.
But I thought it was time for Jack to let her rip.
That's what Carlos said.
I'm not feeding you for a week.
I am not above taking low-hanging fruit.
But this particular place, for a while, was an independent city-state, but it has been annexed by Flame and lost that sovereignty. It was governed not by a king or by nobility, but by merchants and hired mercenaries. And while it is a particularly interesting port area because it is a major port city. It was largely run by a council. And at one point, it was a kingdom. But that was 250 years ago, and that kingdom had collapsed. Mostly due to a merchant rebellion. And again, until it was a leading commercial city until it was annexed by Flame. And again, I think the main reason why it was able to be annexed was, well, considering who runs Flame, are you really going to argue with that guy?
Probably not.
Nope.
One guy that would, but didn't turn out well for him.
However, it is still a very mercantile favored city, even with that annexation. Though it also means that there's certainly the possibility of making your mark in the place if you know the right people and can spend the right coin. On the other hand, in that area, it's things like the Brown Mountains, Fire Dragon Mountain, which has been mentioned before, and if I had to guess as to why Shooting Star was constantly picking fights with human villages, I would say it's because of what he was tasked with guarding, the Scepter of Domination.
Yeah, that's kind of important. Just a little bit.
Because from what I recall, there was this implication that it wasn't a willing decision for him to guard that artifact. It was a binding.
I could be totally wrong about this, but wasn't the scepter used on Shooting Star, or was it the other way around? I forget. There was something mentioned about that.
The point is that it pretty much locked him up. So of course, if he's going to be locked up, he's going to lash out at anything that is within distance of his wings and claws.
which is basically like a third of the frickin' island.
And it is worth noting that port towns like Raiden are one of the main sources of interaction between Lodos itself and Accursed. Especially nations like Kashu and Mar. Although that doesn't mean that there's a healthy trade route, because Lodos is seen as not resource heavy enough to warrant sending in a massive amount of ships. And in fact, the only trading port between the mainland and Lodos is in Raiden.
Well, let's be frank. It's not, like you said, it's not very resource intensive, and whatever there is, it pretty much has to be kept in the island just to take care of the people there.
Mm-hmm. And you know how it is with sailors and superstition. If they don't want to, if a place is cursed in the eyes of sailors, they're not going, unless you pay a lot of money.
And even then, some sailors might say, "No, I'm not taking the offer."
Mm-hmm.
The smart ones say no.
Oh yeah. Of course, the trade route did have a piracy problem, but that seems to have gone by the wayside a bit. The other thing is that the voyage from southern Accursed to Lodos, if you're lucky, is about 20 days, one way. And that's not accounting for things like weather or other surprises in the sea. Because
and if I remember correctly, that region of the sea constantly has weather problems.
Yep. Or just crazy-ass currents. But way south of Raiden is the Duchies of Moss. Sometimes called the Realm of the God of War and the Kingdom of the Dragon. It is a confederacy that's scattered across the Green and Brown Mountains. Each of the duchies have two names. One is the name they have had since the founding, and the other was the one that was given to them after part of a dragon's body, in order to make clear that Moss as a whole is one country. This also ties into the more complicated look of its coat of arms. Though this means that each part of it has two different names, as mentioned. When the duchies are on good terms with each other, they use the name of the dragon part. When they're not on good terms with each other, they use their original names. But each city-state within it is ruled by a duke. Below that are the high-ranking and low-ranking knights. And occasionally, politics by other means in terms of political assassinations aren't uncommon. But there's a built-in understanding that too much infighting could result in other nations encroaching on them, so they try to keep things civil.
Emphasis on try.
It is a relatively disciplined nation. But it's it's one of those cases where there is a degree of tension. I think the thing that keeps it in that kind of position is Moss is not exactly resource rich. I mean, most of Moss's territory is covered in mountains, so it's not uncommon for nobles to plow the land themselves alongside peasants, because every hand counts.
And at least it'll keep them busy.
Although, given the mountainous area, Moss doesn't seem too far removed from, say, the Scottish Highlands. And in fact, one of the nations is called Highland, or Dragon's Eye. And its Duke has the title of Archduke, basically first among equals. There's a lot of sheer cliffs and steep hills to get around, which does allow them to have some very well-trained horses. It's also probably why the horses of Moss are some of the best trained. But there's also the Duchy of Venom, also known as Dragon Scale, which has a very strong city-state identity, and is occasionally clashing with its neighbor Valus. Also, they may have been the cause of a civil war during the Demon War and the War of Heroes. So,
Valus? No, they would never.
But within Venom, and it's Venom, not Venom. I don't know why I said Venom. Is its second largest city, Muscat, as well as Skard, which is a smaller place to the south. And Skard was patient zero for the Demon War. It was an act of desperation because of the aggression from Venom. So its Duke at the time, Brooke, had freed the demons. Which went about as well as you'd think. But of course, west of Moss and south of Highland is Harkane, also known as Dragon's Flame. It is one of the greater powers, and its Duke was the Archduke during the War of Heroes. There's also Russin, also known as the Dragon's Tail, and Renton, also known as Dragon's Claw. There is also a woodland northeast of Moss called the Mirror Forest, which does have a large amount of elves. And we lost Sig for a moment. He's dealing with tech issues. He will be back shortly, I hope.
Sorry about that. My computer just was up.
No worries. But there were elves also in the Forest of Cannon, but they were wiped out by the Dark Elves. So, blah. But within this area is a labyrinth known as the Deepest Labyrinth. This was where an ancient kingdom summoner had sealed the demons. It was also where the Demon King was laying, because he was still trapped in that labyrinth. 100 heroes had challenged the labyrinth, but most of them were wiped out except for the 6 heroes. The 6 heroes are the ones who would gain that legendary status, but also would be at the center of the War of Heroes shortly afterwards. And those six were Nice, Wart, Flyby, a nameless mage knight, Von, Nasher, Beld, and Flaus. And I know somebody. Wait, nobody knew who the mage knight was. She was masked the whole time, but later on we found out who she actually was, and the meme of, if something bad happens in Lodos, blame Carla.
Yep. Fucking Carla.
But speaking of which, within Moss is where Wart's tower is. He mainly stays in that tower, one, because he's not a people person, and two, in order to make sure that the demons don't come back. But
The world's longest babysitting job.
Also, within the mountains of Moss is the gold-scaled Dragon King Mycen, one of the other 5 chromatic dragons who guards another one of these staffs, the Staff of Life. But as mentioned, there's the issue with the Kingdom of Valis, which is the kingdom to the east of Moss. So essentially in the south-central part of Lodos, where that Delta Island is. This is often known as the Holy Kingdom. The state religion is worship of the supreme god Faris. And in fact, one could say that the strength of that faith is Vatican level, because nobody ever misses morning and evening prayers.
Oh boy.
Oh, they're fun. They're really fun.
Oh, I could already see where this is going.
Yeah. They are also so what you essentially have is a very theocratic state. One where the king is selected from high-ranking knights, and hereditary succession is outright discouraged.
I just love the idea of a theocracy where your entire religion is built around the concept of trial by combat.
I mean, it certainly avoids the problem of having the kid today who are spoiled rotten who can't do shit.
I mean, it is valid. It just might lead to other problems for, say, if you're a neighbor of said kingdom.
Yeah, I already brought that up when it came to Scarred and Venom getting pressed.
Oh yeah, they like to do that.
But it is a very strict formal kind of state. Now, the Holy Knights of it are a hereditary order, but while there are a lot of priests there, not as many of them can perform miracles as one might think. Then again, the ones that could perform miracles are going to be actually out there performing miracles instead of doing statecraft. So there is certainly that, and of course, because of that, the line between priest and knight is kind of thin. Though even with that, they do have a healthy agriculture export, especially grain and even more especially cattle. So, yeah, they might be annoying and lecture you, but at least if you're working for them, you're going to get well fed.
Which is always a bonus.
Well, and to be fair, as far as Lotus goes, that's a that's a pretty big perk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but further eastward is the kingdom of Canaan, and to the south of that, Marmo. Canaan is known as the Green Kingdom by some. It is heavy on agriculture and livestock farming, as well as a lot of commercial and industrial development. They also have some of the most popular wines among the aristocracy. Canaan had a long history and tradition, and then Marmo happened.
My favorite, Marmo.
Marmo came along, screwed everything up. Local Marmo ruins everything. And it's still Carla's fault.
Yep. Ironically enough, that's not an exaggeration either.
But it was eventually reunited under King Rayona. Not our Rayona, but
I was about to say,
different spelling. But even with that reunification, its power among the other kingdoms in Lodos is drastically down. Which is saying something because the kingdom of Canaan had been around for 300 years. Now, within its forests there were quite a few elves, but when Marmo happened, the Dark Elves slaughtered a lot of those elves. But then to the south of Canaan, that is where you have the island that was the Marmo Empire. And Ambo says, yes, better than shaved Wookiee. Let's tune in to find out. I hate that I had to endure seeing that. But it is believed that the island of Marmo is where the goddess of destruction, Cardis, had rested, and the curse is still in effect on that island. Even by the standards of Lodos, the bounty on the island is scarce, and it's difficult to live there. And because of that, Alania and Canaan had used it as a place to exile criminals.
They pretty much turned Marmo into effectively legally distinct Australia.
But
Kinda, except everyone on Marmo is more pissed off.
It did result in the spread of belief in the dark god Phalaris. And there is a strong influence of different monsters, dark elves, and the like. And Ammo says, so that was worse than the sausage cups with mug root beer. I hated that on principle because I don't like mug.
That's a brief aside. If you ever wondered how a human being would be able to unify an army of dark elves, kobolds, goblins, etc., send them to Marmo for a year. That should tell you what Marmo's like.
Oh yeah. Oh no.
Yeah, calling Marmo a shithole is a insult to shitholes. It is a very um might makes right kind of place. Or as they say it, the living are winners, the dead are losers. And
I
given
fucking love Marmo.
and that kind of ideology, the only time you have any real stability is when you have a very, very strong leader, which you had at first with Brunei and then with Belt.
For the record, Beld is basically the walking embodiment of being a badass.
Mm-hmm. But it is
Every good fiction, it's a badass.
But it is a place where not only is it where the strong survive, but also you have the sword of Damocles constantly over your head if you have any degree of power. Although sometimes I do wonder if some people went there just for other reasons, because the Knights of Marmo have a large amount of women, and a lot of the other nations don't allow women to be knights. Of course, even with the reform into more of a meritocracy a la Flame, there are still some folks who want to bring back the good old days, as it were.
Well, to be fair, the most abundant resource in Marmo is warm bodies. They don't last long, but they're abundant compared to everything else.
Yeah.
You would think they would have died off by now with all the constant blood and bodies, but yeah, whatever.
Yeah. But the main capital was originally called Persei when Brunei took over. Then a era later, it was renamed Darktown, and currently it's known as Windis after it became a enclave of flame. Now, one might say, wait, Flame's way to the north. How did they get all the way across Canon? Like I said, Canon didn't have a whole lot of political power to really bring to bear. And Flame is even despite its small size, is one of the strongest militaries on the island.
I mean, are you going to say no to Flame when he says, give us passage, or we're just going to trample over you?
Pretty much. Now, on the opposite side of it was the town of Salbad, which would also be known as the Veiled City, as well as the Forest of Darkness, which had various demons, different savages, and of course dark elves. Though the forest was burned down when the chieftain of the Dark Elves burned down the forest in the fight with the Knights of Flame who attacked it. The forest is regenerating, but it is still the Forest of Darkness. And within that place was the black dragon Nars, who guarded the Faramir of Knowledge.
So that's 3 dragons. We're missing 2 now, right?
Yeah. Although Nars was involved in the machinations of the Black Knight Ashram and the Black Wizard Wagnard. And when that curse was lifted, it became the guardian deity of the Marmo Empire. So, when the Temple of the Dark God was attacked, he fled. Then again, so did Ashram. But the story of Ashram fleeing Lodos, that is something we will not be getting to today, because that's a whole other kettle of fish. But we mentioned 5. The sorcerer I mentioned was collecting items known as the Governor's Treasures. Magical relics that belong to Solvatan, who was the governor of Lodos during the Ancient Kingdom. There are 5 of them in total. Each of them was guarded by a dragon. And those items were the Mirror of Truth, the Scepter of Domination, the Pheromore of Knowledge, the Soul Crystal Ball, and the Staff of Life. And because you're dealing with Ancient Kingdom shit, it is always going to be very damn powerful. The Scepter of Domination, its wielder could subjugate any sentient being. The Mirror of Truth reflects the answer to every question. Only what is happening in not just the present, but also the past. And that was possessed by an ice dragon in the White Dragon Mountains. I already covered the Pheromore of Knowledge. The Soul Crystal Ball could potentially bring the dead back to life. It was not made by a sorcerer.
What's the catch?
Well, it's guarded by a water dragon, living on a clear island to the north of Raiden. It was defeated by the Knights of Marmo during the War of Heroes. Eventually, the crystal ball would be stolen by an adventurer and stored in flame, then stolen again by the Black Sorceress subordinates at the start of the War of the Destroyer's Resurrection, and used for the ritual for the advent of Cardus. It's currently housed in the Treasure of Flames Royal Castle. So the catch isn't that you're going to lose your life if you use it. The catch is if you've got it, everybody's going to be gunning for your ass.
Mm-hmm.
And the Staff of Life could instantly heal physical wounds. So that covers all five of them. And as I mentioned, there seems to be an implication. I don't know if this was outright said in the books. It's been a while since I read through some of them. That the dragons were bound to protect those items due to the governor of Castul. Because remember, any mage from the Ancient Kingdom is an order of magnitude far more powerful than a modern sorcerer in the setting.
That's what I was thinking of when it came to Shooting Star and the Staff of Dominance.
Mm-hmm. And the idea of ancient magic being able to bind dragons isn't too far-fetched. You know, considering that they were able to float around whole damn cities and small islands worth of cities during the height of that kingdom. Not to mention, a certain woman bound her soul into a circlet, and that's the reason why she keeps sticking around to fuck things up.
The Grey Witch, I did read a little ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Damn it, Carla.
But as far as the different races of Lodos, obviously you have the humans, you have half elves, as well as regular elves and high elves. Oh. And I wouldn't be surprised if some people have done a what if story of if Parn and Deedlit had raised their own kid. Because let's be honest, let's be honest, there was a universe where that ended up happening.
Gotta say, if that didn't happen, I would be absolutely shocked.
Mm-hmm. We have the dwarves, who, as mentioned, are very much the Fae of the Earth, and have much more interaction with humans, and many of them live in human societies or towns. There are two main tribes of dwarves in Lodos. The northern tribe, which is the Iron Kingdom, and the Kingdom of Stone, the southern tribe. The latter was destroyed during the Demon War. But even with the southern settlements being destroyed, there are underground tunnels all over Lodos. And you could kind of look at it as a labyrinth of tunnels that net all over the island.
And those tunnels are never used for anything nefarious ever.
Oh no.
Yep. There are grass runners, but they're extremely rare on Lodos. They're far more common on Alecrest. You might have a few eccentrics that come across by boat, but that's it. And even that's a stretch. You never really saw much in the way of grass runners in any of these story. And of course, there are other races like goblins, ogres, dark elves, Yoma. But and obviously, when it comes to the history of the place, you have the pre-Demon War era, which was over 500 years ago, and much like every place else, it too dealt with the rebellions through the end of the Age of Magic and the beginning of the Age of Sword, which we have covered in the past. And it was about 300 years after Alanya was founded, which was probably the first nation not in the post-Castul era. That was where you start to have the Demon War, because the Duchies of Moss freed the Demon King.
Whoops.
Now the different Duchies of Moss tried to fight against the demons by themselves, but were completely outmatched.
Should have called the Doomslayer.
Mm-hmm. And that was what led to the calling of what would become the 100 Heroes. Eventually, a group from that 100 Heroes challenged the Deep Labyrinth, which was the root of where the Demon King was. As mentioned, the 6 heroes that would emerge from it would be key players in the War of Heroes, which was only about 30 years after the end of the Demon War. And that was when Marmo decided to attack the mainland of Lodos, led by Beld.
My favorite arc.
I mean, it's kind of hard to argue how good that arc was.
And hey there, Dragon and Damien, welcome to the party. But
yeah, no, that arc was good enough to warrant an anime. So yeah, it is very good.
Well, it was the 90s. Everything was getting an anime,
Fair point.
or at least getting an OVA, because Megazone 23 was far more of a success than anyone thought it was going to be.
Actually, that's a really good point. I've never considered that. But yeah, no, you're right. That is a very good point.
But the first casualty of the War of Heroes was the Kingdom of Canaan. And, you know, when one of the kingdoms goes down, the other ones are going to take notice. And that should have been the end of it, except all those kingdoms suddenly had to deal with their own civil wars.
This is my own headcanon, but I'm thoroughly convinced that the reason you go after the Kingdom of Canaan first is because they're the ones with the wine.
Yeah, that is...
I mean, let's be blunt. The island sucks. You already got women in Marmo. What's the next thing you need? Booze. It makes sense.
Man does have a point.
Yeah. But eventually Marmo heads north all the way up to Valis. And it was a duel between the King of Valis, Fan, and Emperor Beld of Marmo, where Fan lost his life, but then King Kashu comes in, and Beld also died, which of course made Ashram pissed off, and he declared that he would have his vengeance at one point.
Ashram. The pretty boy.
But even with that, the death of Fawn, which of course was Carla's fault.
I wasn't joking when I said when in doubt blame Carla, because somehow it's gonna wind up back being her fault.
At some point, we're gonna have to create a list of something that isn't her fault.
There's gonna be a very short list.
But even after Marmo's aggression was stopped, that didn't stop a lot of the problems, because Canaan was still occupied by Marmo, and the Yoma who had spread out were a threat in various places all over the island. You had the civil strife in Moss and Alania, so the worst was over, but the battle itself wasn't. So for quite a while, you have a situation where you have a kind of protracted Cold War and border skirmish issue. And 10 years afterwards, Marmo decided to come back, making an alliance with Duke Raster of one of the Alania factions, which was in the midst of civil war. Don was captured in the process. Meanwhile, Flame had captured the Fire Dragon's hunting grounds at that place, and also annexed Raiden. The forces of Flame had to ally with Valis to liberate Canaan, and then hunt down Marmo's forces on the Dark Island. At the same time, the Highland Army, who had reigned over the civil war on Moss, joined that coalition and resulted in a two-pronged attack against the Dark Island. eventually the Marmo Empire was destroyed, and that was the end of the War of the Destroyer's resurrection. I'm skimming a fair few things, but... And then, of course, we've been dancing around it, but let's talk a little bit more about Carla. She has the title of the Grey Witch because she's always trying to maintain her own idea of balance.
Her own very, very, very warped idea of balance.
Because her idea of it is making sure that no one nation has more power than the others, which would make her a perfect agent for Comstar if she were to cross over into that universe.
Oh lord.
But Carla, her true idea, the main thing that's known about who she was that she was a sorceress from the Ancient Kingdom. Beyond that, it's hard to say, especially since at some point she placed her spirit in a circlet. Whoever wears that circlet is possessed by her, and she puppeteers that person's body.
And just to clarify for anybody listening, what I mean by a very warped idea of balance is, to piggyback off what Mildred was saying, yes, no one nation could have greater power than another, so I need you to constantly be fighting and killing each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's her outlook on the world.
So she's basically Lolth.
Yeah, pretty much.
Which I know one might say, but the Ancient Kingdom fell 500 years ago. How is she still around? Like I said, she's been body hopping for 500 years.
She found a cheat code.
Her cheat
So
code.
that's where Full Metal Alchemist got the idea.
Yeah, she has been jumping between bodies for centuries. Anytime somebody picks up that particular circlet and wears it, she ends up taking them over. And
So basically, she's the circle is this universe's version of the One Ring.
although speaking of that, I have to bring up Woodchuck, you fucking idiot.
Fucking Woodchuck. I love Woodchuck. Because if anyone could be possessed by the twisted ass witch who has this warped idea of balance, of course it'd be frickin' Woodchuck.
Who foolishly thought that he would be able to get some kind of power through that after being treated like a thief, because he was a thief.
Yeah. And of course the thief is gonna go for the shiny circlet.
Mm-hmm. Of course, he ends up being possessed by her. Doesn't last long before he ends up getting killed, and she ends up hopping into a new body.
See, people thought fast travel was a cheat code. Laughs in Carla.
Yeah. She was around during the ancient Magic Kingdom. She was around during the founding of Alania, and had lent her strength up against the Queen of the Dead at the time. And of course, she was the nameless Magic Knight during the Demon War. As far as the body that she was controlling at that time, no one really knows. And she wore a mask the whole time, so it's not like she was going to reveal it. And during the War of Heroes, she took the body of a High Priestess of Marfa and continued that conflict. She also led to multiple civil wars, instigated the Venin Rebellion, uh, as well as the death of both Ban and Beld. So it's like she maintained the balance of power, but at what cost?
So, in case anybody was wondering why we say you don't blame the Demon King or this hero or that hero, you blame Carla. This is why.
Mm-hmm.
At least the Demon King was a definitive target, and the war with the demons had a definitive end. And then there's Carla.
Yeah. And keep in mind that during the Demon War, she eliminated Nasher, who could have united the island, which wouldn't fit with her ideology.
Yep, nope, that's tyranny, not balance. So, therefore, nope, screw your peace, go back to war.
Mm-hmm. And even after the War of the Destroyer's resurrection, I don't think it was ever outright confirmed that her circlet was destroyed. So even with that ending and the possibility that Lodas might unite now that Marmo is no longer a threat, she could very well come back.
I was gonna say, I think they just stopped mentioning it. But I don't recall anything saying it was ever destroyed. So, yeah, and of course, it's Carla. It's probably still out there.
Pretty much. And it wouldn't be surprising if there was a alternate timeline where Nasher became essentially the first unifying king, the first emperor of Lodas. During the Demon War, he was referred to as the Glorious Champion. And he was supposed to be he was the son of a duke, but it's not like he had an easy life. But he was also the founder of the Allied Order of Knights. It also done peace negotiations between Venin and Valis, who are two nations who never agree on anything. He also was the one who organized the 100 Heroes, which had been a bunch of outlaws and organized them into a full-on fighting force. So I think it's easy to see why someone like him would be considered a threat to Carla's particular ideology. Because what you essentially have is a general who is just as good of a diplomat as he is as a warrior.
I mean, that basically makes him her Demon King.
Pretty much, because demons are a threat that can always be dealt with. But someone like him, who could easily become a island-wide hero, would be far more of a threat.
Oh yeah, that's basically her nightmare level threat.
Mm-hmm. Which is why I think that if he wasn't assassinated, there's probably a point in time where he becomes emperor.
I mean, there's nothing I could really say that would disprove that theory. Like, the dude is The dude is basically the walking embodiment of warrior, general, pope, like all wrapped up into one.
And in that regard, if I were to draw a parallel, I was tempted to invoke Alexander the Great, but no, not quite him. But any sort of unifying hero king you can think of throughout history would fit.
Especially one that would be considered by the people surrounding them to be effectively a flawless human being.
But
why am I reminded of Arthur Pendragon?
That was probably intentional.
Yep.
However, keep in mind, originally the 100 heroes were just a bunch of people fighting against demons. They didn't have a whole lot of organization. But the 6 heroes could be considered some of the people who helped unify that. But I'm not going to try and claim that Nasher was the only one who did it, because obviously Fawn had very much helped that.
Yeah, you got your 6 pillars and then 94 scrappy boys.
Yeah. Beld being the legendary mercenary himself. Wart being a powerful sage. Nis being a priestess of the Earth Mother. Flabe being the only dwarf in the group. And of course the nameless Mage Knight. But there were a few others, like Flaus, the Saint of the Supreme God, and Frey and Risen, the twin princes, who had the right to the throne of Highland, but gave that up to join the 100 heroes. And and after Nasher had passed, they took over leading the 100 heroes. But they didn't survive the labyrinth. Let's keep in mind the people referred to as the 6 heroes weren't the best, or were they're the ones who came back. Everyone else passed in the labyrinth.
Sounds about pretty standard fare for a setting like this.
Actually, that's the beautiful thing about Lodos. It doesn't just take a stereotype or a trope, it takes all of them and mashes it together into one condensed ball, and it's basically impossible to recreate because it's so unique, because it managed to take every single possible trope and stereotype and build an entire setting around it that works.
Sounds good to me.
This was
That's why I love
something
it.
I did talk about in some of the texts I wrote for Legend Edition. Is what I had said was that, because in that I was trying to define what sort of fantasy Final Fantasy is, and I had introduced and explained a term that I have used called Gestalt fantasy. I call it Gestalt fantasy as a nod to the Gestalt triangle, as well as the Gestalt effect in graphic design, of creating this triangle that doesn't exist. In the same way, with a lot of elements in various anime, you see this mix and matching of elements to create a whole greater than the sum of its parts. And I think the reason when a lot of people try to do similar styles, they're not fully embracing that mix and matching because they're thinking, well, is this realistic to medieval Europe? When the answer to that question should be, who cares?
Accurate.
But obviously the War of Heroes, as I mentioned before, started when Beld had formed the Marmo Empire and started his invasion. And the death of both Fan and Beld was a glorified ceasefire. It wasn't the end of it because a lot of the island was now crawling with Yoma. And Marmo wasn't fully defeated, and the Kingdom of Cannon was treated like slaves. And as I mentioned before, the place was covered with civil wars. But then, of course, there was the War of the Destroyer's Resurrection, which I've already talked about. You had a reunification of Marmo through a council. As well as leading to an eventual alliance between some of the nations that would result in Marmo finally being wiped out. But after that was the New Generation era, but those books happened after this came out. And I know that there was that one Lodos RPG that launched a few years ago, but that hasn't been fully translated at the time we are streaming this. But overall, there is the tumult that we saw with Accursed is somewhat present in Lodos, but I'd actually say there's less tumult on Lodos than there is in Greater Accursed. Some of that is due to the fact that you've got a lot more ground to cover on Accursed and a lot more nations to deal with. But I'd say there's also the fact that a lot of the issue is still the fact that Carla keeps sneaking out.
Carla.
Mm-hmm. I know it'd be tempting.
And I was gonna say, if anybody was wondering, no, you cannot fix Carla. Don't try.
Oh.
Wasn't planning on it.
Well, Woodchuck thought he could try, and we saw how that turned out.
Exactly.
Oh, well, Woodchuck is the outlier.
Well, it was because, well, he's dead. But obviously, with some of the characters of the various eras, I think one of the big things to come out of it is the arc that Parn went through. I know we've made the whole thing about him being a dense protagonist, but his armor is a hand-me-down because his father was believed to have been disgraced. Though it's quickly revealed that's not entirely what happened. I'm pretty sure you remember the incident that was talked about where, even though he was treated as if he was a disgrace who abandoned his duties, in reality, to some of the other knights, he was a hero.
I was gonna say, if I remember correctly, Parn's father was kind of referred to as like the unknown hero or the thankless hero, something like that. I forget how they actually worded it.
Pretty much. And He had a chance to join Fahn's Royal Knights, didn't take it. He had a chance to study become a knight at Flame, didn't take it, and those sort of things were what led to him eventually gaining the title of the Knight of Lodos. Being a knight that was not tied to any one kingdom.
Which, to be fair, is a pretty boss flex move if you're gonna talk about it. Like,
And it does take a pretty solid spine if you could pretty much just give the finger to effectively every nation and say, no, I'm going independent.
yeah, especially when you have, legendary heroes trying to recruit you and bring you up onto their level. You're just like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
all right.
Him being the Knight of Lodos was the culmination. Before that, he was referred to as the Free Knight.
Again, probably the most accurate descriptor ever.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to every single trope. Yeah, he is that. He is that
The
trope
fucking
of-
Ronin.
Yeah, yes, basically.
Mm-hmm.
A knight with no king.
Yeah.
I bet Carla loved that.
And I think the reason why that was taken was because of the fact that due to repeat circumstances he couldn't fully pledge himself to any one nation or faction within Lodos. And just experience going through several wars and fighting alongside and against several different people.
Actually, I believe, if I remember correctly, I think King Cashew in the anime mentioned something about that to Parn.
Yeah, because
It's been a long time since I've watched it.
Cashew was willing to take him under his wing, but due to more pressing matters at the time, it didn't come to that. And he was given a few upgrades to his armor and weapon over the years. But but a lot of it wasn't. It wasn't like he was getting a extensive amount of it. I mean, a couple upgrades, a shield that he didn't use, as well as getting the sword of law, which originally belonged to King Fahn. It was one of the 3 sacred items: the sword of law, the armor of justice, and the shield of light. But some of that was equipped during the War of Heroes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. A lot of this is within the light novels, which I do think people should read. If only to see that there's a lot more within the world of Lodos that a lot of people didn't get to see. you know, because of the fact that they had only seen the two animes that we got. And I know some people will bring up the video game. That's a completely separate story, and I believe that takes place long before Record. I'm trying to remember where in the setting the video game took place in.
I'm not gonna lie, I actually completely forgot the video game existed.
Or rather, the let me rephrase that. The Advent of Cardis, the video game that was on the Dreamcast. I'm not referring to Deedlit and Wonder Labyrinth. That's a completely separate thing. The only thing I recall about it is that you were playing as a resurrected version of Bell to stop Cardis.
I do vaguely remember that, but I never got the chance to play it because I didn't have a Dreamcast.
Mm-hmm. I saw a lot of people say it was a Diablo clone, but I'm like, Diablo wouldn't be coming to the Dreamcast anytime soon, so I say take it.
I mean, yeah, why not? Take what you can get. Also, Lodos and Diablo, kind of similar settings in the dark fantasy idea, but that's where the similarities end.
I'd say the similarities are on surface level.
Yeah, they're very surface level. Once you start digging into the lore and everything, you realize, yeah, Lodos and Diablo are not the same.
Yeah, I know some.
They kind of rhyme, but that's about it.
I know some people will say there's a similarity just because, you know, there's the bad habit among critics and fans to look at a few bullet points and say fame. But with that in mind, since you two are relatively new to it, Sig, Hydra, what's your take on Lodos in relation to what we've seen so far with Sword World?
I like the rich history of it, and it's definitely a setting I want to play around in, and I want to find out more about it.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely want to get into the more nitty-gritty details of everything. We definitely did a very good overview, but there's also possibilities to create effectively little side stories, like what was it, Town X or Y going on during, for example, the Demon War. I mean, sure, there's the 100 heroes, but there's still gonna have to be the rank and file everyday folk who decided to stay home.
Pretty much. And there's definitely a lot to want to play in, and that has been a recurring theme throughout, of a very detailed world, which, if I'm being honest, is part of the reason why I feel it's a bit odd when I hear someone say that there is a D&D like aesthetic with Sword World. Because when you consider the setting of Accursed, and I know some people are like, I'm not going to use existing settings, I'm going to make my own. Let's be honest, the people who say that end up making the most generic-ass settings possible. I'm not calling anyone out, I'm just stating facts. I've been in that camp too.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that as well.
I won't say I'm not guilty of it, but I've done it.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same boat here, myself included.
Because making a detailed world takes time. and when you do the whole you're just adventurers who meet in a tavern, you end up going with the most generic approach possible. And that can work in a one-off beer and pretzels game, but if you're trying to do a lengthy campaign with that as your basis, you're gonna end up in problems.
Yep.
I will say that when it comes to the setting that we have here, I'm not entirely sure you can really divorce the rule set of Sword World from the world that it inhabits. It would be tricky to do that with 1.0 era Sword World, and when we get to 2.0 and 2.5, it is definitely gonna be a challenge. I know that there is a conversion kit that was made, but it is going to still be a challenge. And by that
Which
I
is a
mean,
which is a darn shame, because I totally would love to see that even if it's unofficially, see if we can go ahead and have an adventure in Lodos, or adventure in Lodos, using the more recent rule sets.
that's already
Yeah,
taken
that'd be
care
neat.
of. There's already been a conversion guide made. And I know there was a replay that was made a few months ago that talked about crossing over. Further, there's been an implication that the Mad God Faris in 2.0 and the Evil God in 1.0 are the same god with different names. There's also an implication that grass runners somehow crossed over between the worlds.
Shit, I'd be down for exploring that.
Yeah, but that replay has not been translated. Still,
Sad.
there is the possibility, especially given how the Demon Realm is treated as this world between worlds in a lot of its descriptions, whether it be in 1.0 or 2.0. So it's not outright stated, but there's a kind of backdoor for those who want to pursue that.
From some of the stuff I've listened to that you've shown me, Mildra, I've heard that it kind of exists in the world of Sword World as a physical thing you can cross into, but when you go into it, you don't come out the same.
Yeah. The end of the Magic Railroad campaign had Arya going into the Demon World and not coming back. And I've used that as a thing of, well, if I want to have her prop up as a follower in other campaigns, I can do that. And what was the one with Riona? I did. She had a cameo at the end.
Oh.
Arya. Now, what may very well be to your run's version of the Doomslayer.
That's pretty much what she turned into. When I did the post show for that campaign, I carried the implication that imps would be far more willing to work with warlocks and not screw them over, if only because they'd be more scared of going back into the demon realm.
So you leave your things kind of open-ended to kind of use them as plot points in other games. Something I do.
Yeah. I have cited Riku Sanjo as an influence in doing that, because he likes to leave things open-ended. As if to say, the story that you've been following is over, but the story of these characters isn't. Which is something I like to do. That ending of, oh, they didn't just settle down. There was another adventure that called to them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more partial to Kill Tomino's approach. Even if you are a named character, there's no guarantee you're coming back.
I'm not sure how well that works when you're dealing with tabletop.
And indeed, you raise a good point.
But that being said, this was the end of the lore end of things when it comes to looking at Sword World 1.0. When we come back in 2 weeks, we'll be delving into the mechanics of the 2d6 system and seeing some of the origin points of several elements of the system that would become even more prominent when we get to the 2.0 era. And that is going to entail some of the way characters work, some of the ways that the different mechanics work, definitely the way classes work, because I feel like the class system is one of the key things that a lot of people have to get used to very fast. But that will happen in 2 weeks. Next week will be a bit of a double feature for me, because I am going to be appearing on Sig's one-shot. He's doing a Christmas-themed one-shot using Legend Edition.
Yep.
That I originally wasn't intending to, but because of a series of unfortunate incidents in relation to Lemony Snicket, I decided to step in with an old character name of mine and a very unique build. At least unique in my opinion.
The creator get to play his own game. That's kind of how I see it.
It's the reason why I enjoy bringing guest GMs in like I did last Saturday.
Well, if you ever need someone to run Legend Edition after this one, shit, I'll do it.
Yeah. Which is definitely appreciated. I have some ideas that I might want to explore at some point. Obviously, it wouldn't be the next season, but it's something to consider. And shortly after that, Zan and I will be continuing with, well, Fated Continuum, this time covering Final Fantasy VI, which I will admit I have a complicated relationship with, mostly due to certain parts of the fan base of that game that felt the need to shoot down anything that I liked for not being as good as 6. This was something I had to deal with for years.
Definitely gonna have to come onto that, because 6 was really the first game I got into.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, I'm not bashing Final Fantasy VI with this. I'm more bashing the people who used Final Fantasy VI as a cudgel. Because when you do that kind of thing, nobody wins. You lose because you end up looking like a dick, and the game itself loses because you've now poisoned the damn well.
Yep.
It's for that same reason I can't stand it when people do the X wasn't as good as Y back in the day. Or to use another example, the folk who have to prop up X at Y's expense. Like the part of the grogs in the BattleTech community who feel the need to insist that BattleTech is so much superior to mech anime. Yes, I am very well of the irony. No, they won't admit to it.
Oh, what a crock of shit. Sounds like.
Oh, it is. But that's a story for another time. So, until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, I wish Zan was here to do his usual intro for these, but I can't do it as good as him, so I'm not going to. But my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
See you on the trail.
Damn it, what?
遅い上洛な上少年関税を忘年関税を年々上新規